Inflation slowed in November, much to government's relief. The question is, will the momentum continue now that non-monetary measures seem to be working to ease rising prices of goods? Bim Santos with this report.
Janet is relieved that her family's food budget has remained steady for the past month. Though prices remain high, she's thankful that some goods like vegetables have stopped rising for the past few weeks.
Siyempre nakakaginhawa, lalo na magki-Christmas pa. Malaking kaginhawaan siyempre, lalo na sa mga Pilipino.
November inflation came in at 6%, lower than the 6.7% recorded in October. This is the first time that the year-on-year inflation rate went down after it plateaued from the 9-year high in September. Month-on-month, inflation posted a negative 0.3%, the first time prices went down on a monthly basis since the negative 0.2% in February 2016. November's inflation rate was largely pulled down by the slowdown in food and non-alcoholic beverages, which has the largest weight in the inflation basket. This is followed by the decline in prices of utilities and gas, as well as electricity.
From August, we see a downward trend of the month-on-month changes. So this is actually an indication that if nothing changes, there is no negative intervention to price it that will change prices upward, then prices are actually decreasing.
The November rate puts the year-to-date inflation at 5.2%, still outside of the 2 to 4 target range of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. In a statement, BSP Governor Nestor Espinilla said the slowdown in inflation is encouraging and proves that government interventions to arrest prices are working. The government's economic managers meanwhile said managing inflation expectations remain crucial and asked businesses to refrain from any unwarranted price increases, especially with a scheduled increase in fuel excise tax next year. Bim Santos, We Are One News.
To further discuss these latest numbers on inflation, we have our business reporter, Bim Santos. Bim, to what finally do we credit these fall in prices of goods?
There are three main indices that register slowdowns for November. Primarily, this is food inflation, utilities and other fuels, as well as communication. Of the three, the most significant decrease was actually food. Came down to 8.0 from 9.4. This is significant because food is actually corners the biggest weight in the inflation basket, which is about over 1/3 or 38%. Though the thing to note here is that actually 8% is still comparatively high, as the food inflation in November 2017 of last year was actually 3%. So 3% to 8% suggests that there's still much work to do in that regard.
Okay, speaking of much more work to do, this is reporting on numbers from November, but what's the outlook for next year?
There are a couple of things that's happening on the domestic front. Locally, the President Duterte has announced the cabinet that the fuel tax hike for next year is a go. But even that, economic managers are confident that even with that additional imposition, inflation will remain manageable. This is so because actually the current levels of domestic pump prices today have reverted back to their levels before the implementation of the tax reform package. This is primarily on the back of softening crude prices. Another thing for next year is that the rice tariffication bill may start to take root, although there's still much work to be done there in terms of ironing out the implementing rules and regulations, as well as streamlining the import processing system once the bill is enacted. Of course, another thing that will be positive for the government is that base effect will be gone by next year, as the effect of the fuel tax hikes implemented this year will be gone from the calculation. Robbie?
Okay, now, of course, apart from the tax hikes, in the past months, high inflation was putting pressure on the BSP to raise interest rates. What implications do the latest numbers have on monetary policy?
Analysts are of the consensus right now that softening inflation for November actually now provides latitude for the BSP to pause for this year, as they still have the Monetary Board still have meeting scheduled for next week, December 13. So many are forecasting the BSP to pause and take stock after what is their most aggressive tightening cycle in about 2 decades, after they hiked basis points by about 175 basis points for the year. Next year will be another, it's an open question, as that would depend primarily on how soon the central bank may whip up the inflation rate into the 2 to 4% target range. Another thing, though headline inflation has been moderating, one thing to note also is that core inflation actually is still inching up. It inched up to 5.1% from 4.9% in October, suggesting that there are still latent price pressures that need to be addressed midterm. Robbie?
Okay, that was Bim Santos. Thank you, Bim.